18 to 20-year-olds, the elected governing body of a $23 million a year asset owning 20 properties in the Bay Area, one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world. Democracy means you get to have your say. It doesn't necessarily mean you get to have your way. But they're all dealing with membership education. They're all dealing with financing issues. They're all dealing with shares and share structures and incorporation issues, especially women leaders, where they are adapted and habituated to being interrupted in board meetings, where they're regularly having their ideas stolen, where women are just being oppressed by patriarchy in the workplace.
Can you build a common point of unity from that exchange space, and how do you do it? Is it just through conversation or just people showing up, being open? Can it be built? Good day, Atlanta and our global co-op family. I'm Ahzjah, your host and Chief Celebration Officer for the Women in Cooperation Project and founder of the Co-op Nation Network. We're celebrating the power, brilliance, and innovation of women working in the cooperative space, as well as cooperators, cooperateurs nationwide and globally working diligently in the spirit of cooperation to drive their missions, visions, and positive social change and impact forward for more equitable ecosystems. Today, we're joined by Kate Sassy Sassoon of Sassy Facilitation. Kate is a lifelong cooperative advocate and is devoted to creating efficient and ethical processes for high-impact collaboration. Kate is also the founder and principal at Sassy Facilitation, supporting cooperative communication. Having participated in a wide variety of innovative member and mission-driven organizations for over 25 years, Sassy has a wealth of experience in organizational culture, change management, education and training, RP5, community organizing, mission-driven strategic planning, democratic decision-making processes, and the design of that, conflict management and mediation, very, very critical work in the cooperative space. She has also served on many boards as board of directors, large and small, and teaches at numerous conferences across the U.S. and holds 2 degrees from University of California, Berkeley. So let's take a minute to welcome Sassy to the program. So excited to speak with her today. Hello, Sassy. Welcome.
Hey.
How are you?
Yes, I'm fantastic. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to chat with y'all and generally talk co-op shop, my favorite thing.
So excited to have you as well. I mean, you have this just amazing energy. I remember when we launched Women in Cooperation, we had these great testimonials, invites, and yours was so powerful and so energetic and awesome. We're like, we got to have her on the program. So here we are. And again, welcome and thank you for being with us. Let's get started. So of course, share with us a little bit about your journey into the cooperative space and then your journey into the work that you're doing today.
Yeah. So this is what fun, actually, just recently, the first co-op conference I ever taught at, and the most recent I taught at, so that would be NASCO, the North American Students of Cooperation Education and Training Conference. I taught back in, goodness, I think I first attended in 2006. And then just this last June, down in San Diego, California, we had the California Co-op Conference. And my friend and colleague Esteban Kelly did this exercise at both of those conferences, where we invite everyone to stand, and then we ask, as you've progressively been in co-ops longer, we ask you to keep standing as others sit and celebrate you. And I realized the very first time that I did that I've actually, as Esteban put it, I'm a Twin Pines diaper baby. I grew up in cooperatives, so I've never not been, since I was about 3 years old, a member or a participant or a recipient of the benefits of cooperation in a either formal or informal fashion, right? There's formal co-ops that are like incorporated as such, and then there are, neighborhood groups or a shared leasehold co-op houses that partake of the benefits of cooperation, even if they're not a formal co-op. And I've been in those my whole life. So my mother was a single mom, and her and 3 other single moms co-opted their own home and daycare when I was a kid. Then I was actually a formal member of the Venice Parents Daycare Cooperative down in Los Angeles. Then I moved up to Berkeley and lived in student housing. So the Berkeley Student Cooperatives, where I was a board member as my work shift for a little while, aside from also doing dishes and cleaning floors and teaching people about consent. And then after that experience, I realized, okay, not only do I have this energy that you mentioned that I was born with, figure I might as well channel it for some good, and all of this experience that in my formative years of the practical skills that you need in action in order to share not just governance power but also operational power of a key lived asset like housing or work or childcare or home care of other flavors. I was like, oh, I have all these things, and somehow also I'm not really afraid of high stakes conflict. Don't know where that's from, but I figured I'd
Mm.
put all those together and support other co-ops trying to co-op better. And so there happened to be an immediate need. The Berkeley Student Co-ops, one of the houses was going through some issues because they'd had a failure of culture and someone had been taking some drugs and then they had actually died on the premises and the co-op really needed to address it. So a literal life or death issue where they needed to come together and get some support from the community on how to deal with that as a board and how to continue operating in a way that would helpfully solve for that problem and assuage their other stakeholders' fears like the University of California, the city of Berkeley, etc. And so I was like, oh, all right, let me create a business real quick and come back and help. And so that was the origin of my work as well. So I've always been in co-ops and then decided to keep being in co-ops for my sins.
How
So yeah.
beautiful. That is beautiful. I mean, it's probably obvious, but do you think, and maybe you could share a little bit about this, how the fact that you sort of came up in cooperatives, sort of born into it, and it's sort of probably in your being and part of the fabric of your life in a more organic way or innate way, and how that influenced your movements, or even just to sort of jump in there, in this
Yeah.
high, like you said, high stakes, highly intense situation, and just sort of go with it. Talk about how you think, growing up in that space influenced your work.
This is probably one of the key pillars of why I keep coming back to co-ops and keep teaching and preaching about co-ops because we talk about alienation from your labor, right? Like we're so distant so often from so much of our power, both in our daily lives, in our workplaces, in so many ways, like the economy we live on, its history, the reasons that it's shaped the way it is, how we like to make sure that we're really disconnected from that because in the space of that disconnection can live things like genocide, racism, patriarchy, etc. Um, I never experienced that because I actually
Mm.
was always really directly like I had power over how my sister was raised in our daycare because they had a kids council at the daycare where the kids could speak to the adults and the adults all cared for each other's kids. So we all got a diversity of parenting styles and an acknowledgement that that was a true thing, that there was no right way to be, that there was a diversity of ways to be. And that was a byproduct of getting childcare. Right. And then in housing, if I didn't like the way that we were spending our budget as housing, or if we wanted to change something about our literal physical living space, we could get together and make that decision. Right. And so it was on us to do it, but we also had the power. So that experience of those who are being governed have the right to choose how to be governed, that's just my baseline in terms of how
Mhm.
governance should be. And so that means that I approach things without the trauma and the experience of having to cope with, navigate, or like hold the energetic bullshit of trauma around being disconnected from power over my daily experience. It's not total,
Mhm.
right? So after I lived in the housing co-ops, I also have now been a worker owner of three different kinds of worker owned enterprise of different flavors. And there's limitations in that, right? So when I was a worker owner, I couldn't make a decision that would change the environmental conditions of our workplace or change the marketplace in which we were operating. But I could make decisions about whether or not we're going to make vegan pastries or not. Right. And there's just something about that really connecting you to the power over your daily lives that makes you in a certain way even more fearless than we are when we're youth. Right. And
Mm.
sometimes when we're youth, we're just like, well, the world hasn't told us we can't yet, so why not? And something about both that moment of energy, my innate energy, and the fact that I had that direct experience, right? Like in what world, in the normal world, would it be normal for a bunch of 18 to 20-year-olds to be the elected governing body of a $23 million a year asset owning 20 properties in the Bay Area, one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world? And yet there we were, empowered to do that in that student cooperative, right? And so that really just showed me that all power structures are creations of humans. I am a human, therefore I can create power structures.
Mm.
And that
Mhm.
just really helped me understand that no, I do have a place in this, and I didn't have to pay the tax of
Mhm.
having that me constantly being told no. No, you can't do that. And I acknowledge, like, I definitely have some privilege. This white skin definitely helped with that. But also, there are ways in which I had some not so privilege, right? I'm a femme shaped human. And I still managed to experience that because of the co ops I was a part of and because of I was the recipient of the labor of the co opers who came before me.
Okay.
And so that just really helped.
Wow, that's amazing. And so I'm thinking about just your experience as you were moving into the space, and you're having challenges, right? I'm sure there's some challenge you can speak to, but also some things that you're really excited and proud about, and how you actually took that that lens that you had and filled
Mm,
the gaps to the people that don't have that lens, like
yeah.
how you even began to shape those conversations or approach different situations and sort of help people to come out of that space to sort of see through your lens to get through. Or maybe I'm assuming that's how you did it, but how did you really bridge that gap, do you think?
That's a
For
key ingredient for sure.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I use as a set of ground rules whenever I'm working with any group, right? And so we love ground rules, right? We love a set of agreements that we use to help communicate with each other. And I have a tool that I've been collecting and using and refining in the community since I was 14, which is when I started formally training in facilitation. There was a popular education based thing at my school that I was able to participate in, and then formally trained in facilitation since then, in every way. There was a tool that in there that I use a lot called the 50% rule. Right, so the 50% rule is one of my this is on my website for free. It's all Creative Commons license. Please go ahead and use it and iterate it, take it. It's for the movement. But there's in the consensual dialogue part of that where we're talking about how do we what's the nuts and bolts of how do we actually listen to each other and do this work together from a diversity of places and experiences. Like, what's the nuts and bolts? How do we do it? The 50% rule is just a guideline that helps us understand that in any situation where you have a group of people coming together to try and do a thing where you've got an issue or a point of friction or a challenge to overcome in some way, whether that's between you as a group or between you and the world, everybody has a part of it, right? So it's never 100% your fault or 100% my fault or 100% just on the world. There's always some sliver of a place where you are on the hook for it. And that means there's some place where you can take action because you have power over that thing, right? So even if it's, for example, and to use a real example from the co-op housing space, say there's a neighbor that you have lives in your co-op that consistently leaves dishes and mess on the floor, right? That would feel pretty like 100% normally, right? Oh, they're leaving dishes. They're clearly the problem. Why don't they just put the dishes where they go? But even in that moment, you have a sliver of power. How am I have power over how do I react to that situation? How do I choose to communicate with that situation? How do I hold them in my heart and in my mind? Maybe they're disabled and it's twice as hard for them. How do I bring my power to the situation to help solve the problem? And that little tiny, just a basic tool of looking for your power. Where am I in this is another way to
Mhm.
put that. And that can just really help, even if you are structurally disempowered, systemically disempowered in all of these ways, you do still have some small sliver of power. And maybe that power is just in how you ask for help or how you ask to be recognized. But you have some area where you can stand on. And it's in the co op's interest, and the co op in the ground rules agrees to find everybody's area of power and then
Mhm.
lift them up and build them up from that. So that's
Okay.
one of the ways I try and do that. I try and be like,
Yeah.
where do you have power? And then let's weave all of that together, find the gaps so we can make sure we empower each other, but start from a place of you do have power. Let's find it. And then
Mhm.
let's grow it together.
Okay, wonderful. And then what I also heard in there was the place of power and also the place of acceptance or accountability,
Yeah.
because you may be able to say, what is the power here? But maybe there's something that I can do to change a situation that I haven't done before either, right? I'm just leaving it totally up to this other person, but not thinking about what I can do to change some things as well.
Yeah.
Um, all
Yeah,
right, let's
there's
see.
this saying I like to say a lot to my clients. In fact, I was saying this morning is democracy means you get to have your say, but it doesn't necessarily mean you get to have your way. You got to come together to discover the way forward together by
Mhm.
maximizing everybody's say. Um,
Very
is it?
good.
There's that both waysness of it.
Yeah, yeah. So how do you think, overall, now this, I mean, the work that you're doing is, I mean, it's key, right? It's like at the core of cooperation,
Yeah.
right? Being able to manage conflict and transform those situations. How do you think that the cooperative movement, or maybe the different segments of the cooperative movement, how are we doing with
Mm.
that work, and that, how are we impacting, and are we moving in the direction we need to be? Or just your thoughts overall of when you sort of just reflect on that for a minute as a system.
Yeah. What immediately comes to mind is this wonderful article that was recently written by Michael, whose name I always forget. I'm
Mercer?
terrible with
Mercer?
names. Yeah, on building resilient organizations.
Yeah, yeah.
That just felt that was an excellently timed article, and I took once I read it through like for the fourth time, I turned and looked at a little bit of an inventory of this movement that now I've been in my whole life, but like like an agent helping other people out now for my business is now about 15 years old, and looking now at the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops is 20 years old. Project Equity is turning 10. The California Co-op Conference is turning, I don't know how old, but somewhere around there. There is a little bit of a reflection moment we're engaging in as a movement, and a multifaceted movement that we are. Right, there's branches of it that are more in the solidarity economy. There's more the eco village space. There's all sorts of flavors of this thing, and I think how we hold ourselves, and how we hold each other, and how we hold space for the operationalizing of diversity and is really up for us. And I would say, from my perspective, and this is definitely, I want to account for some observer effect, because I tend to I now have developed a bit of a reputation of that girl who's not afraid of conflict. Call her when you get the really hard problems. I'm like, cool, I'm down. That's fine. Let's do it. Maybe not more than one at a time, though, please. Um, and I would say that we're a lot of co-ops that are existing and that have been in the space for a while have left the like 101 problems behind. The basics they've got structures, they've got basic agreements. The pandemic and the 5 years that we went through, then that shook everybody a little bit, but like the ground is basically stable. They know, if not what exactly to do, they know who to ask or what to try. But there is this moment, and again, we know this in the co-op world, whenever there's an economic crisis, a global trauma of some kind that has any kind of impact on economics or livelihood or basic societal functioning, people remember co-ops exist again. And they're like, oh, what about that? That's sexy. Maybe we can. And then, groups want to fund it and groups want to make them happen. And so we're in a bit of that moment right now. And so what I'm
Mhm.
seeing is folks who are getting radicalized to various degrees, who are recognizing that the way things are organized does not serve them or theirs or our collective future, and are like, what can I do about this? Oh, I've learned about co-ops, and I've learned about sharing power versus extracting power as an organizational norm. I want to do that. I want to do that. Let's do that. And I'm going to dive right in with both feet, and I'm not necessarily going to prepare very much. And then 2 or 3 years down the road, I got a lot of problems. That's a thing I'm noticing more and more right now. There's a lot of folks who are coming to the party less educated and less prepared because the knowledge of co-ops have been hidden from them. That's
Yeah.
on us. Like, that's on the world. We as a movement could get better at telling our stories. We could get less afraid of marketing. Marketing is not just a tool of the man. Let's call it outreach, and like dig in, please. But there's folks who are really wanting to lend their shoulder to this wheel and are just ill prepared and ill skilled to do so.
Yeah.
And so the thing that we need to do as a movement is have ways to, in a selective and consensual fashion, be more welcoming and be more ready to on-ramp those people into our movement. And I don't want to say that's like it's everybody's job to do that, because then we get into the world of like, yes, queer folks should be educating straight folks on how to become allies to our movement. Like, nah, we don't want to be playing with that power dynamic, right? Like, if you are the one, but we do actually, though, need to be welcoming folks in ways that help them actually come in
Yeah.
and practice and learn. And we need to
Mhm.
recognize that this is an intergenerational process, and that it's okay for folks to be ignorant. I was ignorant once too, even me, the diaper baby, right? And so that's a thing I'm noticing right now that's up for me, is how to be better at and consciously put intention and structure to welcoming folks who are new to cooperation, who are new to radicalization, who are new to taking the ideas of what if we shared power and then like putting them into legal form and like
Mm.
putting their money behind it, putting their labor behind it, organizing their lives so that they are taking the risk of contributing. Right, we're in a bit of an explosion of worker cooperatives, for example. That's
Yeah.
risk. Starting any enterprise is a risk, and de-risking that is part of what the movement should be helping them do, so that they can come on in and bring their neighbors in, bring their friends in.
Mm.
And helping a really big thing is, what do we do when we disagree? Huge question, right? And like, are we just going to fight about it? Well, yeah, probably, but there's some constructive ways to fight. And by the way, can we reframe conflict from a winner take all extractive punch out to a necessary and natural part of life that we can navigate collectively and collaboratively in a way that actually maybe solves our problems in ways that make us better people as well as better problem solvers? Because that's possible. Even if you've never experienced it, that's possible. And so that's
Mhm.
something that I do a lot of right now, is just helping people be like, no, there's a different way. Let me show you how, and I'll hold your hand while we do it together.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, but you talked about so much there. There was so much the conflict transformation. I've been hearing that more and more too in some conversations we
Mm,
had earlier with Dr. Jessica Gordon Emhart, and I think
mm.
other person, oh gosh, I don't know what is her name. But
Honor
conflict
her spirit.
transformation is what, yes, her spirit is with us right now. Conflict
Yeah.
transformation is the work that she's doing. And I know
Mm,
National Black Food Justice Alliance, they have actually a conflict transformation arm, and this person
nice.
actually leads that. So you talked about that and a few other aspects, but just all of those things, how could we, I mean, do you feel that there is more that we could have in place in terms of infrastructure and
Mm,
as a movement? And maybe how would we bring in those conversations around power, the basic co-op 101s, the work that you're doing to
yeah.
actually help people on board into the movement? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I have like two thoughts. One is, even as a movement, we are still fairly fragmented in many ways. So I deliberately use, I've told you my history, I go across different kinds of co-ops, right? I'm like, if you're a co-op, any flavor. I even work with organizations who aren't co-ops but are like, we want to share power. I'm like, cool, you're in the family, come on in. But there tends to be, I think, it fairly normal and natural siloing by kind of co-op, and then
Yeah.
sometimes even by industry, right?
Yeah.
So the consumer co-ops that are all carpet purchasers tend to talk to each other. That makes sense. But the consumer co-ops don't really talk to the credit unions, who don't even necessarily all know that they're co-ops, and they certainly don't talk to or easily finance the worker co-ops, who may or may not have anything to share with the housing co-ops, and never mind the daycare co-ops over here, right? So there is a common set of challenges that all of these face, but they're not necessarily, even as there are different industry and sector specific things they face, which are not necessarily going to be helpful to learn from. But they're all dealing with membership education. They're all dealing with financing issues. They're all dealing with shares and share structures and incorporation issues, all of those. And we're not very good at talking to each other. So that's one thing we could be doing.
Yeah.
I see a couple of efforts that are working on that and that could be encouraged to increase or spawn other models. One is the, as I mentioned before, the California Co-op Conference. So that started as an intentionally multi-sector co-op conference across the different sectors, deliberately bringing them together. And then the National Co-op Business Association, kind of at the national American level, took on that idea and now has the Co-op Impact Conference, which is a multi-sector conference once a year.
Yeah.
I think that they could both be doing a better job at bringing other kinds of folks together that maybe are co-op adjacent, but aren't necessarily in the movement. So there's that. Like, as a movement, we need to be talking to each other better in more structural ways. Right now,
Yeah.
we have just a few humans like me, like Simon Kelly, like a few other folks that I could name, who kind of deliberately go across everything and are just kind of like, hey, like we're a little bit of like ecosystem connective tissue humans, but we
Yes.
could be better about that as a whole. And one thing I see as a data point toward that is there's a group called Cooperation Works, which is a group of co-op developers and supporters. And that we just partnered. I'm a member of that organization now. I just joined this year. And we just partnered, yay, we just partnered with the National Co-op Business Association to pilot a new program of trying to connect mentors and mentees, folks who've been in the movement for a minute, and new developers who are just coming to the party and just need a little bit of mentorship. And so we just piloted that program, and it was, a pilot. So of course it was a little creaky, but it was actually delightful. And I have now 3 new amazing mentee friends and 5 new amazing mentor colleagues. And just that is really helpful, because my ability to ask hard questions of my colleagues in service of folks who need my support is just doubled and tripled. So more of that would be good. Just more connecting our dots, and then making sure that we're turning outward and bringing folks up behind us, I think are 2 really key things that we need to be doing.
Love it, love it, love it, love it. Okay. And then on that same vein, what are some courageous conversations that you think that we need to be having that we're not having as a movement? And then maybe we'll answer that question, and then we'll go more into some women specific conversations, but across the board, some courageous conversations that you think.
I love the courageous conversation framing. Crucial conversations, brave conversations, whatever it is, like where we need to be doing some real talk that we're not necessarily doing but could be doing better. I think that as ever, it is really important to be, and this is especially true as we welcome more folks in who are perhaps newer to having explicit and crucial and courageous conversations inside their formal organization spaces. A lot of folks, depending on the culture that they're from, the identities that they're from, formal collaboration or co-ownership or workspaces aren't appropriate to be having certain kinds of conflict conversation or certain kinds of courageous conversation. And so first off, just norming that, no, yes, it is. Here are the frameworks that we use to make it psychologically safe. Here are the tools and agreements that we use to make it generative and additive. But yes, no, that is an appropriate conversation. We will be having it now. Thank you. Just that arc, bringing them into that truth, that's huge. So there's the preparing to have the conversation that is a whole emotional labor budget line item that we want to just visibilize, and preparing people to have that conversation again, so that they are not harmed by it, but rather empowered by it, right? We don't want to be like, why can't you have a courageous conversation? Why don't you have any practice at this, person who's been oppressed and disempowered their entire lives? We want to be like, oh man, so here's some new structures for you. Come on in, and I'm going to make sure that you feel safe and empowered to do this. And then the categories of those conversations, what we should be filling them with, I see first and always and forever, making sure that we're just talking about power and oppression in our intersections between our people, and in how that is manifested in our structures, and how we can continue to correct for that, right? So that could be things like, for example, real concrete example, the Sustainable Economies Law Center, right? Great movement building organization working at the intersection of law and all of this stuff. Lawyers out there doing good things. They created internally to themselves a legally compliant reparations bonus for their structures, whereby they could actually do reparations as a part of their employment costs, but in a legally compliant way, right? So that they're not running afoul of those protected categories, discrimination issues that actually then makes more discrimination happen. And the conversations that they needed to have inside to make that work were big, right? They needed to deal with actually putting their money where their mouth was, and what that brought up for people, and what that made people feel, and how they then acted. Similarly, they put in place a 1-year parental leave policy. Huge. And the conversations they needed to have inside were big. They needed to actually hold space for a lot of dissonance around well, why, if you get that, then why didn't I get that? And if you get that, well, what does that mean for these other people? All of that, right? The mutual impacts, and then holding space for those conversations. So that's what I mean. That kind of thing is what I mean when I say, how do we operationalize our values? And then how do we hold space for the dissonance that that's going to cause? Because we aren't all, right? We're going to have feelings about that. That's normal. We're going to make some space for that. So that's a whole category of courageous conversation that I feel like we are having, and we need to continuously get better about, and then get better about telling the story to each other when we've had it, so we can build on each other's conversations as well as our.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. That's some powerful stuff. Again, it comes back to your work because I love that you said, we have these conversations and then you said, well, here's some framework, right? The helpful stuff. And then I guess maybe even tools so that you can have the conversations and feel safe. Because a lot of times I have seen where conversations start, but then everybody's just sort of left with whatever they're
Yeah.
left with, right? And that seems like
Yeah.
that could be more dangerous than, not talking about it. Yeah. So
Yeah, let's open a can of worms and like spread the trauma around and like reactivate you. And then, okay, we're done. Meeting's over. Like,
just leave me with that stuff, right?
I don't
Yeah.
know about that. I think that might have done more harm than good. Because, like,
Exactly. So that sounds amazing. Like we're figuring things out on these podcasts, right? Like we got all the answers here. But no, but that's huge. And then and the courageous conversations, of course, are oftentimes leading to might lead to more conflict. And
yeah.
so you've got that whole conflict transformation piece, not being afraid of it, but facing whatever it is you need to talk about in a safe space with the tools that you have. I mean, that
Mhm.
just seems so foundational to the work that we're doing. And even if you're not a cooperative, that's just life, right? Conflict in life, individually, everything we're doing is based on this concept. And
Yeah.
oftentimes we don't see the results we want because we just simply don't know how to have the conversation. And so
Yeah.
I love that you brought that up. And even in terms of infrastructure, that might sound kind of, official and too tight, but if we were to say what are some major building blocks that we can put into infrastructure, whether it's for people coming on board into the movement or people that have been in the movement forever, that's
Yeah.
just huge. So thank you
I
for
love
that.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
that's
would be
that's
huge.
actually something I think about a lot. There's one, just real quick, a process that I use that I developed by being in it,
Yeah,
called that I basically do. I teach a workshop on it, and I also do this with organizations all the time, where it's kind of creating your conflict management plan, right? Reframing it
nice.
right there. We're not resolving it. It's not a thing that's going to go away. It's a thing we just manage. It's just a thing. We're just going to deal with it. And we have these three phases where it's like, how do you anticipate conflict? Like, how do you set yourself up to like hold each other well in space? Do have mechanisms that help everything be clear and empowering so that when you do run into conflict, it's not because of like a simple thing that you could have solved for by just having an agreement, but rather it's a real conflict that needs attending to. And how do you manage it in the moment, right? What structures and processes do you have? Like, do you pull from transformational justice? Do you use anti-oppression technologies? Like, do you do circles? Do you do like dyads? Like, what do you do in the moment, and where does it live in your meetings, and how much time and energy and money do you put behind it? And then there's the healing phase, which we skip so much, which is why we have so many problems. Like, how do you, like, the business case for it, even? How do you harvest from the lessons of that moment and use that to become more resilient as an organization? And at the
Mhm,
minimum, how do you learn where y'all fucked up so you don't fuck up again? Like,
mm,
how do you do that? And so we have this process where I take them through the arc, and then I do, all right, let's do an audit. What do y'all got? Fill in the blocks. What do you have in each of these sections? Oh, look, we have an employee handbook. Cool. Let's put that in anticipate. Does it have a conflict management section? Great. That goes in manage. Awesome. Do you do retrospectives regularly after conflict? Cool. Let's put that in the healing section. And we do an audit to look for, again, where do you have power? What have you got already? And then where are the key gaps? Right?
yeah,
Oh, look, you've got all these things, but this part where it says, and now we're fighting, got nothing. So cool. Let's fill that with some
yeah,
structures, rituals, and like,
yeah,
here's some templates from other groups that's got yours. So that's one thing I do that is just very concrete in that world. Like, how do we
mhm.
actually take a look and then make a plan?
Yeah. What are some other I'm scanning your website now. Maybe you can share. You've got a lot of different workshops here. Basic
Yeah.
skills and structures. Let's see, brush up or facilitate democratic decision making 101.
Mm.
Consensus decision making. What are some of your favorites to facilitate, and what do you think are some that are really necessary and that could help folks right now? They're
Mm.
starting or existing cooperatives.
Right? So I tend to focus in on kind of two key areas in all of the work, because I feel like it's the right point of the lever, and that's decision making and communication, just generally speaking, right? So if you can talk about shit and you can decide shit together, then you can build whatever you need to solve whatever problems you've got. Right. And so from that perspective, those tend to be the focus of anything I teach, but there's a lot of different flavors of what folks need. Right. So two of my most popular classes are, again, the creating a conflict management plan, real popular one. And also the democratic decision making comparative class. So I do like there's all the different forms of decision making you can have, right? From autocratic dictatorship over to unanimous consensus, right? There's this whole spectrum and other axes besides. And one of the things I do with that workshop is I just take people through a tour of all of them, because most folks have, if they've experienced any other kind of decision making other than like command and control, which is your default, I'm not going to call it normal or traditional, I'm going to call it the default business model that we've got out there in the world, where there's a person in authority, maybe they're elected, probably not, and they tell you what to do by maybe telling a bunch of people between you and them what to do. If that's most people's experience, then there's all these other ones that they just may not know about. And so we go through them. We go through, what is, and then what's the difference between a decision-making process and decision rule, right? There's I have an idea, or, oh my God, the roof needs to be fixed, or we have a new product to launch, all the way through, okay, what do we do about that? How, when, we discuss, we gather subject matter expertise, maybe we gather some outlying perspectives, we have some people who have good thoughts, maybe we vote, maybe we don't. Like, what happens at each of those moments? We decide a thing. We implement the thing. Who does it? By how? When? How do we decide that? How are they held accountable? And then, did it work? That's a big, how do we check? And how do we do so in a way that actually closes that accountability loop and moves us forward? So there's so many ways to do that in a sharing power way. And they're all pretty technical, actually. So we kind of go through, in this situation, here's the 3 different ways of doing that that might make the most sense for your organization. Or, okay, here's a context. What kinds of flavors of decision making might make sense for that? Let's find our way through it. And if you then decide that, let's make a matrix for your organization for these categories of thing, for governance decisions, for dissolution. Do we close the thing or not? Or do we take out a big loan? Or do we hire a person? Or do we terminate a member? Here's who makes the decision, and here's what they consider, and here's how they do it. Maybe let's write all that down. So those are kind of things that we cover in that workshop and other ones that are related, that folks generally find, even if they're long-term co-opers, this is a place where everybody can improve. So startups to OG, everybody needs this in a different way. So that's that's a category of the work that I do, workshops, and I do a lot of custom trainings for organizations. That's kind of the biggest one. We dig in there a lot.
I love that. You get into some really good stuff. So let's see, what do you, across the board in the different sectors, industries, different types of clients, what do you sort of see as some of the core reasons that a group may not be able to be successful at collective decision making? Or, well, let's start there. Then I have another one on the conflict side. But just what do you see comes when you distill it down across the board as what might be some of those key things that prevent?
Oh, I love the way you're making me think right now. So some common threads in groups that fail to achieve easeful or successful collective decision making. And I'm going to say the examples and the folks that I'm thinking about kind of run the gamut between their meetings are just kind of shitty and they don't get a lot done very well, to the co-op failed itself into non-existence. That's the side of the spectrum I'm thinking of right now, right? So from that side, kind of on this side of the we're getting the bills paid, but it's not fun. That side, I'd say that most often what folks are dealing with are either perceived or real conflicts and genuine differences of opinion and outlook between the people, that they don't have enough common ground and common commitment to overcome. Right. So there's always going to be a certain amount of conflict. You're always going to disagree with me on some things, whether it's just like the nail polish color that we choose or something, right? There's going to be some things where we're not 100% homogenous. In fact, we seek out groups where we're not homogenous because diversity is the spice of life. And also there's a business case for it, I am enriched by a diversity of viewpoints around me, and I hope I enrich my comrades, right? So when that's true, you're going to have differences, but do you have enough common ground? Do you have enough in the center of your Venn diagram that it's easy for you to see each other as fellow humans, as community members, as people that I want to and joyfully and consensually take on the responsibility of leaning toward and being curious about and wanting to understand and collaborate with. So if you have enough of that at the center, you can tolerate a substantial amount of friction. You can even tolerate a lot of situations where, like, I firmly disagree with this with my whole heart, but because I don't think it's going to harm the co-op, I'm going to abstain and let you go ahead and do it because I
Mhm.
believe you are in it with me. And so I can tolerate the fact that I absolutely hate the color you chose for our storefront or our marketing plan or
Yep.
how you want to arrange the garden, right? So there's that, just not enough common ground to overcome or balance out the friction. There's also just lack of clarity, and its close cousin. Uh, there is clarity on what the formal structures are, but what actually happens is not that. And it's some sort of parallel power that usually relies on or makes space for all of those other hegemonic, disruptive, systemic oppressions and power differentials to just come on in and reinsert themselves into the process.
Mhm.
So it's like either you didn't write down what you do, and so nobody knows and they don't know how to do it well because they don't know what it is, or you wrote it down, but that's not how it really works. And you haven't
Mhm.
closed that gap and addressed that truth. That's really common. And that again ranges from like good faith, we're scrambling to make it work and we just never had time to write it down. And maybe we haven't realized that we needed to do that yet. And we just need someone else to come be like, hey, your meetings would be 50% more efficient if you wrote down the agenda beforehand. They'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, good idea, right? Or you've got a couple of folks in there, or one or two people to a cabal of people who are interested in that not happening because they're not actually out for the whole group, they're out for their own agenda. And that unfortunately does happen. And we as co-ops are particularly ill-equipped to recognize that. That is one of our weaknesses. We want to believe that democracy is a panacea. We want to believe everybody's here in good faith. We want to believe that's so hard.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not true. And that sucks. But
Yeah.
it's still a thing that we need to account for, which is
Mhm.
why I really talk to groups about accountability and member termination proceedings being one of the first things you've got to have. You got to be really careful about how you bring in, how you hold them, and how you ask people to leave. Because sometimes that's absolutely necessary.
Necessary.
Any group of people that has like in group is safe knows this, and it's just something we got to learn as a co-op. Those are really the big ones that I see, like all the way from up. It's just kind of messy to you. The ones that fail themselves in so hard, it's because that common ground was either non-existent, or they had one or a couple of people who were maybe they even believed they were down for the co-op, but their actions don't match their words,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they are not down for the group. They're not down for the collective vision. They're down for themselves, served by the collective vision, and that's just not going to work.
Can you build a common point of unity from that extreme space? And how do you do it? Is it just through conversation or just people showing up, being open? Can it be built?
I have seen, I would say at this point, after like 15 years of being the person who gets called and 35 years of being in it, I've seen maybe 5 groups that are really close to the edge of failing themselves out of existence, but through
Yeah.
conflict. And of those 5, only 2 actually went over the edge.
Wow.
Um, and
Yeah.
and those 2 that went over the edge, I don't. This is a thing that I'm excited to gather more data. Like in 20 years, I'm gonna have a real good case study for us as a movement. But that's a small sample size, so I'm not going there yet. But of those 2 that went over the edge, common threads were there was a lot of money and power involved. And the more money involved, the higher stakes. And that money and power involved, unfortunately, also fell along identity privilege lines. So folks who were already more structurally privileged and had more economic power, about trying to balance that with folks who had less money in the project or less ability to economically support the project, and also had less structural hegemonic power. It was just huge, and that's a big bridge to build, and they didn't succeed
Yeah.
in doing it.
Yeah.
And then the other one was environmental. They just like they couldn't make the margins work for their business. They like had conflict and they were dealing with that. And if they just had a solid revenue line, I think they could have worked it out, but they didn't
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
couldn't make the margins work.
Yeah. And you've got all those pieces that have to come together. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's really good stuff. So, what is we're celebrating you today. And we want to thank you so much for this amazing work and amazing conversation. We don't want to let you go just yet, though. Share with us a little bit about, some of what we're talking about and specifically around women. We've
Yeah.
been talking sort of broadly, but I'd love for you to share any specific thoughts around some of what we talked about, whether it's power or conflict transformation, or some of the other topics we had with the lens or focus on women specifically. Oh, and before you do that, I remembered her name, and I need to lift her up.
Yes.
Iafalola Omabola. Iafalola
Yes.
Omabola. I'll say it again. Iafalola Omabola.
Amen.
Cooperation Jackson, amazing. Um, person in the movement and activist
Good
and
work.
author. And I just learned about her through the work we've been doing on these programs. Dara Cooper is her daughter, didn't know that.
Yeah.
And she was the one that was talking about, she's serving in that one of those roles for transformation, conflict
Yes.
transformation. For that organization, and just really seeing it as this key tool to transform the movement, transform cooperative, transform everything. If we can just sort of
Yes.
flip our lens. So I love this conversation we're having. It is coming up. It is coming up in more just groups, arenas, sectors, more different rooms that I'm in. It is starting to come up
Yeah.
more if you're experiencing that. So I think that it's timely, and maybe now we're ready for it. But again,
Yeah.
back to your lens around women specifically in the movement, and anything that you're seeing as well that we need to shine a light on.
I love that. I have kind of two small nuggets, and then I'll just briefly uplift what I shared in my testimonial that inspired me to reach out
Yeah.
back when you were like, hey, let's talk about it, which just want to also zoom out for a second. Look at us engaging in P5, education, training, creating knowledge,
That's
getting it out
right.
there. This is what it looks like.
That's
Right.
right.
So I have some thoughts. So first off, as a person who, like, my father raised me in feminism, right? He got more rainbow stickers and tie dye on his car than I do. Like, he is, I am blessed by having a white boomer dad who is like absolutely an agent of feminism. It's wonderful. He
Nice.
kind of set my standard for what I can expect of dudes, and
Wow.
that's been an interesting thing in my life. So one thing that I'll share is that in as a woman shaped person who is almost entirely cis, who is very like not afraid to use my voice to point out when shit is fucked, especially along lines of structural power. I have not experienced the pink tax that other women, especially women leaders who are now colleagues and comrades and clients of mine, have experienced in their lives and in their careers, where they are adapted and habituated to being interrupted in board meetings, where they're regularly having their ideas stolen, where just women are just being, oppressed by patriarchy in the workplace. Almost entirely my experience is not having paid that tax. My
Mhm.
baseline in my work environment is being an equal person who has a gender and whose gender is celebrated, but it is not actually used as a tool of dismissing me, right? Because the workplaces that I've been in, the worker co-ops that I've been in, have an overt value of being a just workplace, and then actually put in the labor and time to make that happen and educate each other in the processes, right? So like my first worker owned space was, I was a member of a bakery. We're making pastries, we're serving coffee. That's what we're doing. But our meetings are structured such that our voices are equal, so that there are mechanisms by which we make sure that if patriarchy slips in and I get interrupted repeatedly, that we have a mechanism to counterbalance that, and it's joyfully engaged in and accessible to each other, right? So like my daily experience of being a woman, growing a career in the cooperative space, becoming a leader in various ways, even as I am a member in a very horizontal space in so many other ways, I'm not feeling the weight of being oppressed as a woman in so many workplaces. And
Mhm.
I look to my colleagues who are similar age, similar stage of our careers, they are coming with some trauma. They're coming with severe imposter syndrome that is just because they were told their ideas were crazy for so long. And they weren't, they were just getting stolen, right? They're coming with the weight, and that influences their ability to be bold, be audacious, and think about what's possible. I don't have that, and that is because of co-ops. Partly it's my upbringing and what led me to that, but co-ops and getting to pay my rent through being a worker owner for 10 years of my adult life, that prevented me from paying that tax. And that's
Mhm.
huge. That, like, my labor and energy is so liberated. Society is so improved by that, me not having to pay that tax.
Yeah.
So that's just huge. That's like one really big thing that I want to unpack and unpick a little bit when we say just workplaces are better for each other and the economy. Like, that's what we mean. My literal, like, my mindset is broader because it hasn't been shrunk by experiencing patriarchy microaggressions every day at work.
Yep.
Right?
Understood.
So
Wow.
that's one thing I think about. That's like very internal. It's very like, it's hard to name until I can see it and then look in that mirror. It was even hard for me to name until I looked in the mirror of my comrades and saw the trauma they were carrying and noticed it wasn't there in me and was inspired to ask why. And I was like, oh shit, co-ops did it again.
Yeah, that's wonderful. If you could, and just hearing that, it makes you want to just imagine a world where
Yeah.
that was the
Imagine
case.
the energy, the brilliance, if we weren't all paying, racism tax, disability tax, all these other forms of tax. And I can just speak to the patriarchy tax in this moment.
Yeah,
I have my budget, my energetic budget line item, my visionary budget line item is bigger, right? Because
yeah.
it's not siphoned off every day.
I felt that just energetically what it would look like, right? What it would feel like energetically to us all if that were the case. Just all that. Woof, that's wonderful, powerful stuff.
And then just
Um,
like two very, very concrete examples, real short, and then I
yeah,
think we'll release, which is paternity and childcare leave structures in cooperatives, much better, much more grounded. I encourage you to check out the nonprofit quarterly article that Selk published about their process and what theirs is. Variations on that theme, normal on the floor. And to wed it together with conflict really quickly at that, again, that very first worker co-op I was a part of, we had an incident of sexual harassment that really did need to be held. And the process that we went through centered women's rights and transformational justice and the humanity of everyone involved, regardless of their gender, in such a beautiful way that while it was a really terrible thing to have happen and it was not fun to deal with, we came out of that experience, everybody, including the person who experienced the sexual harassment, grateful for the process because we had experienced gender justice happening, which is so rare
yeah.
in our environment. It's so rare that a woman speaks up about being harassed in any kind of sexual way and gets justice and experiences that justice as an actual healing. And
Mm-hmm.
that was our baseline process for that. We achieved it. And that was just real. And it was just a little corner coffee pastry shop in the world, quietly doing good and quietly undoing the trauma of patriarchy.
But that ripple effect, right? That ripple effect of the positive outcome and the healing that's still rippling, right? In
Yeah.
ways that we can't even understand. Um,
Yeah.
any women you'd like to lift up before you go celebrate?
Oh my goodness, so many. I would love, I mean, you mentioned Dr. Gordon Niemhard before. I always want to lift her up. She's a brilliant human and a real cool cat doing great work in the world. And I think beyond that, I think I would just really like to uplift any woman, especially any non-cis woman who's doing work right now in the co-op space and just getting out of bed every day and putting on pants and doing
Yeah,
whatever work they're doing to stay sane and stay alive and stay well. Because there's a higher proportion of, for example, in workers in worker-owned cooperatives are non-cis and non-straight, and just so there's more of us on the ground in these spaces because they're safer for us. And I just want
yeah,
to encourage us all to lift that truth up and to keep it going. We also know that the majority of worker owners are women in the United States context as well. So like all of us sisters, like keep going, do what you need to, maybe get yourself a cup of tea.
nice. Very good. And then one last, we started out doing fun facts. What's a fun
Ooh.
fact of Sassy?
A fun fact germane to this conversation is that I once facilitated a conflict resolution conversation to a successful conclusion in the middle of a 70-mile-an-hour windstorm.
Wow.
That was fun.
Wow.
It was definitely a different variation on high stakes that I hadn't experienced before, and feel very excited to have now under my belt.
Is there ever a conversation where it didn't quite outcome the way you wanted it to, but you had
God,
to say, I can live with that.
Yes, 100%. Probably
Mm,
a third of them at
okay.
least, where I'm like, "This isn't the agenda I had going in, but I see that you are served by it, so let's go."
That's great. I gotta use that terminology. That's great. Oh my goodness. We have been speaking with Kate Sassoon, Sassy Sassoon of Sassy Facilitation. Amazing woman working in our cooperative movement. We're so grateful for your work and grateful for you and that wonderful spirit and love and compassion and commitment to this work. I mean, it shows in every word that you say, and I'm sure that it also shows up in all the work that you do. So thank you again. We're so happy to celebrate you. We wish you continued
Yeah.
success. And
Yeah.
how can folks find out more about you and the work you're doing?
The best place is my website. Mama's still a little bit of an older millennial. I don't really do the socials. So the website is a great place. And then it has a way to just book some time with me and let's have a conversation over tea. That's really where I'm at. I also
Awesome.
teach at a lot of the conferences in the movement. I'm going out there doing stuff. I may be teaching some workshops online soon. People keep asking me. I may be doing that. If you are excited about that, then you let me know. And other than that, I just want to say thank you for doing the work you're doing this P5 work, doing this P6 work, and spreading the love and telling our stories out in the world. Together, we are so much stronger.
Okay, great. Sassy, what's the website folks can find you at?
That would be sassycooperates.org. So SASSYCOOPERATES.org.
All right, very good. You're very welcome. Very welcome. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We had a great time celebrating Kate Sassoon of Sassy Facilitation. Again, you can reach out to her at that information she shared with you. And we want to hear you here, same time, same place, as we continue our celebration of women in cooperation. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Take good care, be well, and peace.